and welcome to today's session of eNishit. We know it is difficult time due to pandemic, and that's why I thank you all that you still was taking out time to continue with the learning sessions of eNishit and Anna HIV-TB. So today we have a very relevant topic to discuss, that is the airborne infection control, especially with context to COVID-19 and that to ART centers. And I think no one can explain it better than our today's expert, Dr. Upasana Agrawal. Although ma'am does not need any introduction, Dr. Upasana is the head of Department of Medicine and in charge of ART and ICTC Center at National Institute of TB and Respiratory Diseases, New Delhi. So now before we start on, as a protocol, we will take the attendance for today. So on your screen, you will be seeing the attendance poll. I request you all to please fill it up. Now we know that while we are doing polling for quite a long time, we know unless we fill every section, that is 1, 2, 3, even if it is 0, the poll will not come to us. The result will not, the attendance will not be registered. So please fill every section and then submit.
There is a humble request to everyone. Basically, there are many of them are not being clearly addressed their username. Doesn't make we can see many people are Oppo, Vivo, and actually this is a kind request. Please, you can rename your address, screen name as your on name or the IRT number name or something. And the people who are using mobile phones, this is a request for use as a landscape mode, because the presentation will be more visible in the landscape mode rather than the vertical mode. Thank you.
So while Mr. Ajit has made a request to rename your name if the name of the mobile number has been entered by mistake. So here we close the poll of attendance, and I request Ajit to please put up the poll, the pre-test poll on the screen. So here are 2 questions. I request everyone to please go through these 2 questions and please attempt. So now it's time to end the polling and time to start our session and to take an insight on the airborne infection control at ART centers. I request Dr. Upasana ma'am, please take over and give us information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And yes, airborne infection is a very, very important topic, but in contrary to what Dr. Vandana said, I am actually not an expert in airborne infection control, but what I'm trying to discuss with you today is information that we have in our manuals, in our guidelines of COVID and TB. And we know that airborne infection control is one of the 3 I's that the government of India, the National AIDS and TB program adopted. Then we changed our HIV-TB guidelines. The other 2 I's being intensified case finding, and the other, what is the second I? INH prophylaxis, and the third I be airborne infection control in ART centers. So you must have heard of this topic earlier also in your trainings. And the idea is not to give a very exhaustive talk or to confuse everybody, because within the literature also there's a lot of confusion when we talk about airborne infection control. In all the papers that I read about infection control, there was a lot of discrepancy in what is called a droplet, what size is called a nuclei. But just to summarize, what I have put together in this presentation is a brief summarization, which is relevant and which is practical. So what are the common airborne infections that we see in health settings? Well, they can be bacteria, virus, or fungus. Bacteria, our biggest enemy, M. tuberculosis, virus, today's prevailing pandemic, corona. But corona is not the only virus that we get through a respiratory route. It can be measles, it can be polio, it can be the chickenpox virus, it can be the rhinovirus. And fungal spores also, actually Aspergillus and Rhizopus, you can take in through the respiratory tract. And what are the common modes of transmission? By saying the common modes of transmission, I want to just explain what happens. How is it that we get into, what are the 3 ways by which we can get infected when we are talking about airborne or air transmission of a infected particle? The first is, what can happen is a direct transmission through droplets. That is, somebody coughs, sneezes, talks loudly, sings loudly. There is there is a spray of naso-oral secretions, and you are directly caught in that spray. Like you're directly in the path of that spray. So that would be direct transmission through respiratory or expiratory droplets. Okay. The other thing that can happen is that there is an environmental reservoir. Like, for example, there's a book, there's a table surface, or there's a key, there is any environmental reservoir which had the infected respiratory secretions of somebody with an infection. Now that person, now this object has become a reservoir, and you came and touched that reservoir, and then you self-inoculated yourself with that infective material. So it could be through an environmental reservoir. Or third, it could be indirect transmission. Now this is very interesting to understand what is indirect transmission. This is actually what is called truly airborne infection. So for the upper two, we can say these are air transmissions, but the real true airborne transmission is through the indirect transmission. And what it means, I will tell you over the next slides. If you look at this slide, this is how respiratory secretions come out, naso-oral secretions. And you will see that there is a wide variety of size of droplets in this secretion. There will be some very large droplets. There will be absolutely visible droplets. And then there will be small, microscopic, submicroscopic, subelectronic size of droplets, which we cannot see. But each cough, a sneeze, a loud spray while talking, it is composed of a number of different sizes of droplets. So coughing, sneezing, and mouth breathing, or even talking loudly or singing, will project droplets into the air that will contain infective organisms. One cough can have about as many as 3,000 droplets. By one cough, I mean doing once. Okay, so you can well imagine somebody constantly coughing. Somebody constantly coughing in the waiting room, how many droplets that person must be releasing into the atmosphere. And what happens every time the person coughs? He coughs out his respiratory secretions, and the infective bacteria or virus, it sort of hitchhikes onto those droplets, and it also comes out. So basically the infection is using your secretions and your respiratory droplets to come out and to find new hosts. Similarly, a sneeze can have tens of thousands of droplets. If you would really look at which is the worst kind of exposure, that would be a sneeze, followed by a cough, open mouth breathing, and then talking. Now, interestingly, we have to understand that there is a difference when we talk on the medical side or the airborne infection side between two types of particles, respiratory particles. One is a droplet and the other is a droplet nuclei. If you look at general English, then droplet should be anything that is wet in the form of a drop should be droplet, and that there is nothing wrong in saying that yes, that is a droplet. But when actually we are talking from the point of view of airborne infection control, we are actually talking about small droplets. Those big visible droplets are actually called large droplets, and they are said that their sizes are maybe more than 100 microns. 1 micron is 1,000 of a millimeter. So anything that is bigger than 1/10 of a millimeter or more than that, 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter, that would be a large droplet. So these are these obvious secretions. But then when we come to airborne infection control, we talk about small droplets. These are droplets which are larger than 5 microns and can go up to 100 microns. And because they are larger sized, they just get deposited into the upper respiratory tract if you inhale them. If they are bigger than 100 microns, then usually what happens, they don't even reach the respiratory tract because the nasal hair, the cilia in the upper respiratory tract, they never even let them enter. But something that is between 5 and 100 microns, and what is a droplet nuclei? A droplet nuclei is when a droplet dries out. It becomes dried, it becomes desiccated, it loses most of its fluid, and by losing most of its fluid covering, you actually get just a small particle of the infective organism surrounded by a thin layer of secretion. Now that is what is a droplet nuclei, and the size of a droplet nuclei is usually less than 5 microns. And this is a dangerous particle because it can go into the most terminal part of your lung, that is the terminal bronchi, and the alveoli. The interesting difference between COVID and TB lies here. You get tuberculosis basically from droplet nuclei. Your TB bacilli has to reach your alveoli to cause a pneumonitis or alveolitis. From the blood vessels and the lymph vessels, it will drain to a local lymph node, and then it will spread to the other parts of the lung. So for TB, your droplet nuclei has to reach your alveoli. The bacteria has to reach your alveoli, and the most efficient TB carrying particle is a droplet nuclei. While on the other hand, COVID actually does not need to reach right till the alveoli to cause its disease. If it is able to colonize and then infect the upper respiratory tract, it can still cause COVID-19 or the pneumonia due to COVID-19. But as we know, some people just have the upper respiratory tract part of it, and a few of people get the lower respiratory tract part of it. So even the large particles, which are called small droplets or only droplets in medical jargon, which are larger than 5 microns but less than 100 microns, these are the ones that cause your COVID-19 disease. So basically, when you talk about COVID, we are talking about a droplet infection, not a droplet nuclei infection. And in a droplet infection, there are two main ways by which you can get infection. That is, if you are caught in the spray of droplets by somebody, like you catch the droplets coming out of the mouth of someone, hence social distancing. Because as I will show you in the next slide, practically all big droplets, they will fall to the ground. They will not fall on you or anyone. They will fall to the ground in 2-meter distance. And the other thing that can happen is that this particular infected person sneezed, coughed on an article. And this article did not allow drying of the droplet very quickly, like it was a steel surface or it was a plastic surface. So it did not dry quickly. Now, when a droplet does not dry, then the virus is viable inside that droplet. And now you come, you touch that object, and then you touch your eyes, nose, or mouth, and you infect yourself. So this is known as transmission through fomites. But interestingly, in tuberculosis, there is no transmission through fomites. The transmission is basically from droplet nuclei. And only where you get infections from droplets is where you get it from fomites. So you can get fomites for COVID, but not for TB. And why is this social distancing important for COVID? As I told you, usually in COVID, the infection is carried by droplets, not droplet nuclei. So if you will see that it just takes, how much time does it take for it to fall to ground? It takes about 6 seconds to fall to the ground. So if you are directly not caught in the spray, within 6 seconds, a droplet which is of the size of 100 micron would have fallen down. Now, the problem can be that it can fall on an object. Instead of falling to the ground, it would have fallen on an object which you are carrying around and making it an environmental reservoir. Hence, what do you do? So this is what explains the social distancing part. If it is even a smaller droplet, I would say even if it is a 10 micron small droplet, then also it is supposed to fall into the ground within 10 minutes. So it is not as if the droplets with COVID infection are floating around in the environment. It's not like that. The problem of having infective inhalable droplets floating around in the environment is with the small droplets. If you will see this red line shows that droplets which are 1 micron, that is less than 5 micron, means a droplet nuclei. It can persist in environment for 16 hours. If somebody coughs once, his infection for TB can survive in the environment for 16 hours. But in the case of a COVID case, where there are large droplets and infection is through large droplets, the maximum time a person who coughs and where it can stay in the environment, it would be only maximum time would be 10 minutes, but most of the particles would have dropped down in 6 seconds. So if you are doing social distancing of more than 2 meters, you are safe from being caught in the direct spray of secretions. Number two, if you keep on doing frequent hand washing and hand hygiene, then what will happen? Any object that you might have touched, which might have been infected by a COVID droplet, would be washed off. And if you make it a point not to touch your eyes, mouth, or nose with your infected hands or infected clothes, then this is an effective prevention against COVID. So which are the areas with high risk of air infection transmission? Yes, ART centers, crowded outpatient rooms, TB wards, bronchoscopy and procedure rooms where you do aerosol generation procedures, intensive care units, which are totally AC and closed off, radiology rooms, autopsy suites. This is a typical example of a crowded waiting area in India. Most of our OPDs look like this. And there were certain guidelines that were published by the Government of India for airborne infection control in 2010, which are very, very relevant. And if any hospital needs NABH, then it has to demonstrate that it is following proper airborne infection control practices. Now, what are the components of airborne infection control practices? There are 4 levels at which you can act. One would be the managerial activities, second would be administrative, third would be environmental control, and fourth would be personal protective equipment. Well, I will not go into great detail and bore you out in this talk. Managerial activities basically mean having committees in place, like basically bringing infection control to the forefront by having dedicated team of people working on it. But if you look at the facility level, that is at the level of your hospital, there are certain managerial measures which the hospital has to take care of as a hospital itself. So one should be implementing hand hygiene. The hospital itself should give trainings on hand hygiene to all its staff and also to patients who are waiting in the waiting room. And this happens in our hospital. Providing basic personal protection, teaching patients respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette. What they are, we will talk later. Preventing injury from needles, like you should have protocols in place. You should have protocols in place that I will do hand hygiene training. These are the people. The staff in this area will be given this personal protection. I will teach patients and staff respiratory hygiene. I will take care of linen and waste management. I will take care of medical waste management. I will try to decompress my OPDs where there is too much crowd. I will somehow make some plan in which there is decompression of crowded areas. I will have a protocol for airborne infection. I will assess my staff regularly for TB and other infectious diseases. And I will train all my healthcare workers in infection control policies. So these are some things that need to be taken care of, which are managerial measures and need to be taken care of at the hospital level. Most of the hospitals have an infection control committee nowadays, which are headed by the institute's head director. And more or less people are working as an institute towards infection control. Now coming to the administrative controls. See, administrative controls, it sounds as if it would be done by administration, but no, these are basically work practices that we have to follow. Okay, it sounds administrative control, but it is another word for work practices, patient care practices that would prevent airborne transmission. And these are the most important first line defenses. And this is what all of us can do, irrespective of the type of room that we are sitting in. Irrespective of the type of infrastructure that we have, all of us can do this administrative controls. And basically, what are these? Basically, it is nothing but actively screening out people who could be potentially infected. We are, as it is, supposed to do it in ART centers, in which we call, say, identification of coughers. Identification of coughers is nothing but active screening. And also symptom screening is nothing that we do. The 4S screening is nothing except for active screening of potentially infected or diseased people. Okay. Second would be separation of the diseased and isolation. Third would be to promote cough etiquette among everyone with signages around you And fourth would be to reduce the time spent by a potentially infective person in a healthcare facility by fast tracking. Now, what would this actually mean? This would actually mean, just a minute, sorry. Coming to the first thing, what would it mean? I hope we all remember that our community care coordinator and our ART staff nurse has to frequently visit the waiting area and identify people who are coughing. People who are coughers are supposed to be identified, and they are supposed to be, what are they supposed to be done? They are supposed to be isolated or separated within the waiting area. There should be a designated place which is 2 feet away from the other people, 2 meters away from other people, where you can ask these people to wait. And this isolation area should be well ventilated. And the idea is that while we are fast tracking them to our medical officer, in the meantime, we do have to keep them waiting somewhere. So we at least keep them away from the other patients, at least a distance of 2 meters. Now, this is what we do for TB for people who are coughing, but we have also started a similar screening for people for COVID-19 in our hospital. This is a form that our hospital's COVID committee devises, and it keeps on revising the version according to the change in the ICMR guidelines, in which every person who walks in, a healthcare worker, asks the person whether they have any symptomatic influenza-like syndromes, and if they have come from any of the hotspots or containment zones. And the list of hotspots is updated every day by our administration. So this is a screening form that we have made for screening for COVID. If anybody works out to be a COVID suspect according to this form, and this form is also not a de novo form, it is based on the ICMR and the Government of India guidelines. If somebody is a COVID suspect, then they are directly sent from this triage station or this screening station to a COVID hospital for further testing and management. So the first step is testing. Second is either referring them out to a relevant facility, as is the case of COVID, or separation among the same place 2 meters away in a well-ventilated place. Teach everybody cough etiquette. What is cough etiquette? That we should not cough or sneeze in our hands. If we have this impulse to cough or sneeze, we should cough or sneeze in our elbow or in a cloth. Okay? Because if you cough or sneeze in your hand, then with the same hand, you will touch the handle, you will touch the water cooler, you will touch the seat, and you will create fomites. For TB, it might not be that important, but yes, those big droplets over the period of time can dry and become droplet nuclei and can start floating into the environment. So though direct inoculation might not be a problem for TB, it is a problem for COVID. And secondly, these can form a bank of infection, which would later become droplet nuclei. So you cough into the elbow, and if you want to spit, then the idea is that you should provide patient with tissues. So they spit into a tissue paper and it is thrown in the normal disposal. Another thing that you have to tell them, if there are any visible secretions on the hand, or they have coughed into their hand, then they should immediately wash their hands with soap and water. So hand hygiene, coughing inside your elbow, not spitting here and there, and if possible, I would seriously recommend that please give all your patients a disposable surgical mask, because when the patient is coughing, that is when the cough is still at the source, when the infection is still at the level of the patient, the size of the droplet is quite big. If you put a mask on the patient, then it prevents escape of big droplets with the infective particles inside and right at the source. So if you give the patient a surgical mask, it is a very, very effective way of controlling the source of infections. Also, make your ART center a place where it talks about respiratory hygiene. Please put up these kind of posters place to place, like sneezing into the elbow, like what happens if you don't sneeze properly. If you don't sneeze, can you see this? This is our hospital's thing. Like this person is sneezing and giving it to so many people. If he sneezes into his elbow, then how it helps. So try to put posters. Fast track people who are coughers or known cases of pulmonary TB, jump the queue, avoid counseling, take them immediately to the doctor and reduce their time in the health facility. So this is about administrative controls. Everybody can do it irrespective of the infrastructure available. Now, the second level of infection control is the environmental control. So this would reduce the concentration of droplets or droplet nuclei. And what is the role of, there should have been an animation here. Well, what is the primary environmental control that we have with us, that all of us can have? That is ventilation. Okay, just ventilate your OPDs. And then there can be three kinds of ventilation: natural ventilation, mechanical ventilation, and mixed mode ventilation. There is something known as a concept of air exchange. By air exchange, we mean that how many times in an hour does the air inside our OPD room or patient care room is entirely changed. So with each air exchange, about 63% of airborne particles are eliminated. And as you increase the air exchanges, there is an exponential reduction in droplets and droplet nuclei. So if you look at the high risk setting like ART centers, there should be more than 12 air exchanges per hour. There is a way of calculating air exchanges, which I don't want to go into detail, but it's just for your information there. And the best way of promoting air exchanges, sufficient air exchanges, is natural ventilation. This means nothing except dilution of air inside the patient care surface, patient care area with fresh air. So what do you need to do for that? You just need to open your doors and windows. And it is always better if the doors and windows are on opposite walls and are facing each other. You can maximize your natural ventilation by opening up fixed window panes. You might have a window, but it might have fixed panes. It is no use. Such a window is of no use. Just open it. Just open that window. If you do not have a window on the opposite wall, is it possible to create a window on the opposite wall which communicates to the exterior? Or can we use something else to mix fans? So basically, our best bet in India is a natural ventilation. But in natural ventilation, sometimes air change exchanges cannot be measured. We cannot measure how much air is coming in or air is coming out. So what we can do is, as a rule of thumb, we can use the fact that the openings should be 20%, more than 20% of the floor area. Suppose you sit in a room which is 10 by 10 feet. So you are sitting in a room which is 100 square feet, then more than 20%, that is more than 20 square feet should be your windows and doors at all times. And as I told you that the biggest challenge is that the droplet nuclei can be floating in the air for 16 hours after the patient coughed and went. So ideally, to maximize natural ventilation, these windows and doors and natural ventilation should be there throughout the 24 hours, which is a huge challenge because we need to lock up our clinics also and go home. But having said that, it's a good idea at least if you open the clinic early in the morning and before patient activity starts. And once the patient goes, it would be a very good idea when you are sitting in the afternoon if you keep your windows and doors open. And it's always preferable to have it on both sides. And if we do not know the direction of airflow, whether it is coming from window to door or door to window, this side or that side, the best thing for the staff to do is sit near the source of fresh air. Okay, because it is quite logical that if there's fresh air, I'm sitting under a window of fresh air, then whatever air would be coming in. And try not to obstruct your airflow by putting cupboards, almirahs, chairs in front of the fresh air. Now, this was about natural ventilation, but sometimes natural ventilation is either not present or it is not enough, especially in OTs where it's an AC environment, and for sterility you have to close all the doors and windows. In bronchoscopy rooms, so in such cases sometimes we need to use a mechanical ventilation. In mechanical ventilation, you actually close off all the doors and windows, and you create a negative pressure in one side, so that everything that is all the air in that particular area is being driven towards the negative pressure side, and from the negative pressure side it is then sucked out through a process and released after going through filters into the atmosphere. so that everybody that is there in the area where there is no negative pressure is free of droplet nuclei. For example, please look at this ward. So this is our MDR-TB ward in NITRD. They are separate cubicles. This is how a cubicle looks like. This is the corridor outside the cubicle. And if you will see, this is how we enter this last picture here. This is how we enter our MDR-TB ward. It's a negative pressure ward. At one time, only one door will open. So if I want to open this door, it has to be ensured that every other door in the area is closed. Otherwise, the negative pressure will not work. So once we go inside, then we press the button on the patient's door. Then this door closes. The main door closes. Then we open, and if you can possibly see, this is a negative pressure room. So if this is a negative pressure room, nothing can come outside. None of the infection or air can come outside into the corridor. Everything that will be there will stay inside this room. And then this negative pressure duct, there is a duct which pulls entire secretions and air into that negative pressure duct, and it passes through a HEPA filter and is then thrown out into the atmosphere after filtration. So see, this is not a very practical solution. This is actually not a very practical solution. It needs maintenance, it needs lots of problems, it needs a lot of money, and it needs daily repairs, and it's a lot of problems. So the best bet for us is a mixed mode ventilation. Sometimes natural ventilation is not that much. For example, you have opened your door and window, but the air current outside is not there. There is a stillness, there is a lot of heat, there is no airflow outside. So then only natural ventilation will not work. So the best bet that we have is a mixed mode ventilation, in which we maximize our natural ventilation with the help of mechanical ventilation. That would be by using fans and exhausts. Now, if you will look at this, this is the NITRD ART center. This is the waiting area of the NITRD ART center. We have kept the waiting area open, well ventilated. There is a cross circulation of air. Plus, we have maximized natural ventilation by putting in ceiling fans. So by putting fans, we have increased the air exchanges in this area. And in the rooms of the medical officer and people who are seeing patients, we have well-placed exhaust fans which take out the air within the clinic and throw it outside. Okay, so we have maximized our natural ventilation by using fans and exhaust fans. This is another view of our ART center, and inside you will see there will be exhaust fans. You will see this is an exhaust fan. This is an exhaust fan. It has a louvre covering so that it doesn't get dirty from outside. It will pull the air from the medical officers and the counselor's room, and it will throw it outside where it will be open for ventilation and fan. So this is how we have maximized ventilation by using natural and mixed mode ventilation. So there are similar things that can be done in ART centers. Now there are certain considerations for the climate. If there is a very hot weather, then best is to have an outdoor shaded waiting area like this. We had a proposal, see, when we made this ART center, there was a proposal to close the waiting area from here. People said, why do you want to keep it open? There will be hot air coming, there will be some rain also that can come to the surface, and then there will be problems. But we said, no, we want ventilation. We want to keep our patients healthy, and a little discomfort at the cost of being healthy will be acceptable. So we kept this open. We didn't close our waiting area at all. There is a shed on the top. There is air supply of fans. There is exhaust fans. If need be, we can use desert coolers, and air conditioners are to be avoided because air conditioners recirculate the same air within the room. So recirculation air conditioners are to be avoided. When it is very cold, we know that you cannot use fans, but then adequate ventilation can be done through exhaust fans. Use exhaust fans intelligently, and do not use heat convectors, but things that are near body heating methods like halogen heaters or those radiator rods. These are the best ways of heating your room. Now, ventilation is good, it's necessary, but another thing is also important when we are talking about ventilation, and that is whether it may be natural, whether it may be mechanical, or whether it may be mixed mode, that what is the direction of the airflow. please do not create an airflow in which you are sitting in between the patient and the window. Okay, please. And if you want to know what is the direction of airflow in my room, you can use a simple agarbatti. Just light up an agarbatti and see where the smoke goes. That will show you the direction of your airflow. Now look at these two things. Look at this picture. This is a window, this is a door. Okay, so we expect that the direction of airflow would be like this, right? So this is our doctor, this is our patient, and everything from the patient is going directly to the doctor and then outside the window, or window, doctor, patient, we don't know. Sometimes it's like this, it's like this. So this is an absolutely wrong way of keeping your desk. Now in the same room, if we rearrange furniture like this, then things are solved. The doctor is here, the patient is here, sitting in between the door and the window. So air comes, patient coughs outside the window. If it comes from the window, air comes, takes the infective particle from the window and outside the door. So, and the doctor is not in between the flow of the infected air. Okay. Even rearranging your furniture according to the airflow is very, very important. So keep in mind two things. One is air exchanges. If not air exchanges, at least adequate natural ventilation, enhanced by mechanical ventilation, and to judge what is the flow of air in your particular settings. If we can do these simple things, then without changing much, we really don't need to change much infrastructure. We can maximize airborne infection control in wherever we are sitting. So these environmental controls which I showed to you, basically ventilation and airflow, are the primary environmental controls. There are certain secondary environmental controls which are basically a HEPA filter or a UV light, but they are actually not very easy to use in dust environments, and they need a lot of maintenance, expensive, can be harmful. So our best bet is to rely on natural ventilation maximized by mechanical ventilation, distancing 2 meters, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene. Okay, and keeping our windows and doors open, placing exhaust fans at critical points. Now, the fourth thing that you can do for airborne infection control is use a personal protection. Well, personal protection, if you use a triple layer surgical mask or TB, at times it is not a good idea for a healthcare worker. Why? Because as I told you that TB spreads by droplet nuclei, which is a very, very, very small particle between 3 to 5 microns. Now, a surgical mask is not able to filter out that small a mask. It's not able to filter out all of, like, it will filter out 80% of those, but not 100% of small droplet nuclei. Even though you might be wearing it, it is possible for you to inhale infective droplet nuclei and get TB. But if a patient wears it, then it is a very good way of infection control, because at the source, at the level of the patient, the droplet is still big. If he wears that surgical mask, then we can keep in almost 100% of the secretions and hence the infective particles within the patient's face area. So giving a face mask to a patient, a triple layer surgical mask to a patient, is a better idea. But as I said, for COVID, in case of COVID, if we wear a surgical mask, then the COVID is spread by droplets, which are big drops and not small droplet nuclei. A surgical mask is good even for the healthcare worker. So surgical mask not good for prevention against TB for healthcare worker, but good for prevention of COVID for the healthcare worker. Surgical mask good for prevention of spread of TB as well as COVID. Okay.
पेशेंट के साथ सिटिंग करना है मास्क है.
So the other kind, there are several other kinds of respirators. For the most famous one that we use is an N95. So this N95 is a mask which prevents 95% of small droplet nuclei to enter the mouth or nose of the wearer. So it is a very, very good mask for prevention of infections like TB, which take place from droplet nuclei. If you look at the COVID side, which takes place, which spreads through droplets, of course an N95 will prevent it, but actually it is not even required, because COVID is not spread through droplet nuclei. It is spread through bigger droplet, which can be staved off by the help of a simple surgical mask. But yes, if we are doing any aerosol generation procedure on a COVID patient, in which you will bring out lower respiratory secretions in small droplets, like you do a bronchoscopy or you do a CPR or you do mechanical ventilation, that time it is recommended that even with a COVID patient, you should wear an N95. Now some learning points. So this was basically all that I had to talk. I know it's a very long, exhaustive lecture. I'm sorry, it might have been boring also. But can you please tell me which one of these two pictures, this is something that I did not cover in my talk, but I want to hear it from you. In an ART center, somebody does a dry mopping with a broom, and one ART center does a wet mopping. Which one do you think is correct? Better. Any answers? Any takers? Anyone? Please unmute and speak. Right? Do I have something in the chat? Nanda, is there something in the chat?
Yes, in chat, they're saying why.
They're saying why. Very good. So why is better? Why is why better? What is she doing here? All the droplets, heavy droplets that fell to the floor and are now dried and desiccated have become droplet nuclei, but are not completely dried or have dried to droplet nuclei. They are now sitting on the floor. By doing a jhadu, what is she doing? She's re-aerosolizing all the infective droplets and droplet nuclei, which had finally settled down on the floor and had become less of a threat, have now become a threat again. So by doing dry mopping, they are re-aerosolizing all those infective materials that had dropped to the floor. Now another learning point. Many a times we have seen windows like this in which the ventilator is closed permanently. This is a new way of building. In old buildings, you will never see this, that they have a window and it is half sliding, or there's a closed ventilator. So this is also not a correct window. You can insist your administration to open the ventilators and to have proper window opening instead of sliding. You should have windows which open, which have handles and which have two panes. Now this is a medical officer's room. He has a window, but he is not opening it. If you have windows which you do not open, please open those windows and don't obstruct it with these things. Like, don't use it as a shelf. Open this window, remove objects which obstruct the flow of air. Now look at this. Now this is from the outside of the room. This is a counselor's room. And there is a ventilator. Interesting. Yes, it's a good ventilator. It's a permanently open ventilator. Excellent. But what have they done to it? They have put an exhaust fan here, thinking that it would help. Now, will it help? No. Why? Because any fresh air that is going in is being short-circuited, sucked out by this exhaust, and it is being thrown out. We wanted this area to be free for inflow. They could have increased the flow of air here if they had put a reverse exhaust or if they had put a fan, so that air from outside could have maximally been pushed inside to the room. Instead, whatever is the fresh air coming into the room, they're sucking it and sending it back. That is not what we want. So hence a properly placed exhaust fan. Similarly, an exhaust fan on a window. A place from where we would expect to pull fresh air, that is where we are putting an exhaust. Please make new openings for exhaust in the walls and put exhaust there and cover them with louvre covering so that they don't get dirty, and it's a one-way valve. Now another learning point, can you see what is the problem here? Obviously crowded waiting area. Number two, an exhaust fan is right in front of the place where it will suck air from the waiting area. So this exhaust fan should not have been here. It should have been somewhere here behind the patient care area. Okay. By putting the exhaust fan here, it is directly pulling all dirty air from the waiting room into the patient care, into the doctor area. There is no ventilation. Okay, windows are blocked. All these are blocked windows. There is AC. Nothing is open to fresh air. It's a recirculating AC. And lastly, they have tried to mitigate everything by using a HEPA filter or a UV light, which is ineffective in dust, which has not been serviced properly, and which is just giving a false sense of security. So these are the small mistakes that we make during infection control. And just to summarize, they are managerial and administrative control. Screen coughers, isolate and separate. Isolate and separate is nothing but social distancing. Social distancing of 2 meters. Fast tracking so that they do not wait in a hospital setting for long. Respiratory hygiene, which is hand hygiene and coughing inside your elbow, and washing hands if there are any respiratory secretions. Make the cougher wear a mask. You yourself wear a mask. Have your environment naturally ventilated and you can maximize it by using fans and exhaust. Please do not rely too much on HEPA filters or UV lights, except otherwise only in cases where you are inside a OT or a bronchoscopy suite. And for personal protective equipment of medical staff, N95 respirators for TB, and simple 3-ply surgical masks for COVID. So I think that is all that I have to talk about today, and I would be happy to take questions or anything that is not clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. So any question from the audience side? Anybody want to ask anything on whatever we have discussed or beyond on AIC, airborne infection control? So
so there is a question. What is the frequency of mopping? See, the frequency of mopping is ideally it is once in 6 to 8 hours. So you can, but in an ART center like ours, we mop once in the morning at 8 o'clock. Then we mop again at 2 o'clock. Because wet mopping, you cannot go wrong with wet mopping. If you do it a little extra, especially in the COVID times, it would be a good idea because it will mop up all those big droplets which would be potentially infected. But please do not make it lesser than 8 hours. In the wards, we recommend twice in a duty. So if there's a duty of 8 hours, in IPD, we tell them twice in a duty. So it becomes approximately once in 4 hours.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks for explaining this. And since we are not seeing any more questions and any more hands raising, I think it's time to wind up. Thank you so much, ma'am, for briefing it. It's actually a valuable thing to talk about and discuss at this point. And without putting any much time and making all our audiences sit in one place in a close thing, there is a post-test on your screen. So I request everyone to attempt the post-test. These are the 2 questions which we have seen earlier before starting in the session. I request everyone to do it quickly. We know the questions. We have read it earlier. So now most of us has already attempted the post-test polls. Let us quickly discuss the 2 questions. The first question says about the AIC measures that we can take at ART centers in today's scenario of COVID-19. And the options were alternating seating arrangement, maintaining social distancing at every counter, like just outside the medical officer's room or pharmacy, or even outside the counselor's room, using the face mask, cough etiquettes and respiratory hygiene, all of the above. So now we know that all these measures are important. So answer is all of the above. The second question is that who is benefited by implementing these infection control measures at the ART centers? Either the PLHIV is benefited, or the ART center staff, or the ART center and the hospital staff where the ART center is, or everyone attending the ARTC and the hospital. So of course, every one of us, that is the ART center staff and the hospital and the patients who are attending it, are benefited through these measures. So thank you. Thanks a lot for putting up the poll and filling it now. And thanks everyone. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you
Thank
for
you, Vandana. Thank you.
thanks for the wonderful lecture. Thanks everyone for attending the session. Thank you, Acheet, for coming and helping us in today's e-Nishchit session. And before we are going out, I request you all to please fill up the feedback form right on your screen right now.